The golden afternoon sun cast long shadows over Brookfield Auto Center, where customers browsed gleaming cars, chatting with eager salespeople. It was a typical busy day at the dealership until Malcolm Hayes stepped onto the lot. Tall and composed, he emerged from a modest sedan, dressed in a crisp white button-down and dark slacks. His presence was unassuming, but his intentions were far from ordinary. Malcolm wasn't just another customer. He was the new owner. Choosing to keep his arrival unannounced, he wanted to observe how his employees treated potential buyers. Adjusting his watch, he strolled toward the showroom, past rows of high-end SUVs and sedans. Inside, the air buzzed with business. Salespeople juggled phone calls while customers explored financing options. Yet, as Malcolm entered, he sensed something shift. Curious glances flickered his way, but no one greeted him. Then a sharp voice cut through the hum of conversation. "Can I help you?" The words weren't welcoming, they were challenging. Malcolm turned toward the voice, meeting the sharp gaze of a woman standing near the front desk. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer, her heels clicked with authority against the showroom floor. "Can I help you?" she repeated, this time slower, her tone carrying an edge that wasn't welcoming. She was Linda Parker, the dealership's longtime manager, known for running a tight ship. She prided herself on efficiency and results, and she didn't waste time on people who, in her mind, weren't serious customers. From the way her eyes flicked over Malcolm, scanning his modest sedan, his simple attire, she had already decided exactly what kind of person he was. Malcolm remained calm, offering a polite smile. "Just browsing, thank you." Linda didn't smile back. Instead, she folded her arms. "Browsing," she repeated, her voice flat. "Well, if you're looking for financing, our team can help. But unless you're ready to buy today, we prefer to focus on active customers." The words hung in the air, cold and dismissive. Malcolm didn't react immediately, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Not anger, not surprise, but something deeper. "I appreciate the information," he said evenly. "I'd like to take a look around if that's okay." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. She hesitated for half a beat before giving a curt nod. "Just don't touch anything without asking first." Then she turned on her heel and walked away. Malcolm exhaled slowly, shaking his head as he continued through the showroom. He stopped by a sleek black SUV, running his fingers lightly over the door handle. Almost instantly, he felt eyes on him. Employees whispered behind desks, their sideways glances quick but obvious. The tension in the air thickened, and Malcolm knew exactly what was happening. He had seen this before. It didn't take long for Linda to return, this time with her arms crossed tightly. "I noticed you've been wandering around for a while," she said, her voice cool but edged with suspicion. "If you're not planning to buy, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We don't have time for distractions." Malcolm turned to face her, still composed. "I have every right to be here," he said simply. Linda scoffed. "Look, I've seen this before. People coming in, wasting time, pretending they're interested, then disappearing when it's time to talk numbers. So unless you're serious, you need to go." Malcolm's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his voice steady. "I think you're making some assumptions about me." Linda's eyes narrowed, irritation flashing across her face. "And I think I know my job," she shot back. "Either prove you're serious, or I'll handle this my way." The challenge hung in the air. Employees had stopped pretending not to watch. The tension in the room had reached its peak. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, studying Linda Parker with an expression that was neither hostile nor amused, just patient. "Handle it your way," he repeated, his voice calm but firm. "What exactly does that mean?" Linda straightened her blazer, her frustration boiling just beneath the surface. "It means I have to ensure my team and our customers feel comfortable," she said coldly. "And right now you're making people uncomfortable by wandering around without a clear purpose." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Uncomfortable because I'm looking at cars in a car dealership?" Her jaw tightened, and she took a step closer, lowering her voice to a sharp whisper. "I don't know what your deal is, but we've had enough people come in here wasting time, asking for test drives, then vanishing when it's time to talk numbers. So unless you're ready to buy, I suggest you leave." Malcolm studied her for a long moment. his expression unreadable. Then a small, knowing smile played at the corner of his lips, one that only seemed to irritate Linda further. "I don't recall asking for a test drive," he said simply. "I'm just observing. Is that against your policy?" Her face flushed slightly, but she didn't back down. "You're disrupting my staff, and I won't allow that." From across the showroom, a young salesman hesitated, clearly overhearing the heated exchange. He looked as if he wanted to step in but thought better of it. Linda noticed his hesitation and shot him a glare, silently daring him to intervene. Malcolm remained composed, his voice measured. "I'd be happy to speak to someone higher up if you think I'm an issue." Linda let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "Higher up, I am the manager. There's no one else you need to speak to." Malcolm took a step back, slipping his hands into his pockets. "Good to know," he said simply. Her frustration boiled over. She turned to the nearest desk, picked up her phone, and began dialing with quick, sharp movements. "If you won't leave on your own, I'll have someone escort you out." Malcolm watched her calmly, his expression unchanging. "You're calling the police over someone looking at cars?" Linda ignored him, speaking into the receiver, her voice firm. "Yes, I have someone here refusing to leave the premises despite multiple requests. He's being uncooperative." A few employees exchanged uneasy glances, their movements slowing as the weight of the situation sank in. One of them, a receptionist, whispered to a coworker, "Do you think she's overreacting?" The coworker shrugged uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with either Malcolm or Linda. Malcolm stood quietly, his gaze steady on Linda. When she hung up the phone, she turned back to him with a triumphant air, as if she had just resolved a major issue. "The authorities will be here shortly," she said, folding her arms. "I suggest you wait outside." Malcolm exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Why would I wait outside?" he asked, his tone still calm. "I haven't done anything wrong." Before Linda could answer, the front door swung open. 2 uniformed police officers walked in. And in that moment, everything changed. The glass door swung open, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. The energy in Brookfield Auto Center shifted instantly. Conversations fizzled out, employees stiffened, and customers turned curious glances toward the unfolding scene. Linda Parker straightened her blazer, her confidence surging back now that she had backup. She gestured toward Malcolm, her tone crisp with authority. "Officers, thank you for coming," she said, her voice just loud enough to ensure the whole room heard. "This man has been asked to leave multiple times, and he's refusing to cooperate." The taller officer, a man with graying hair and a steady gaze, turned his attention to Malcolm. His partner, a younger officer, stood slightly behind him, scanning the room. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance," the older officer said evenly. "Can you tell us what's going on?" Malcolm met the officer's gaze, his demeanor still unshaken. He slipped his phone into his pocket, then folded his hands in front of him, a picture of calm professionalism. "Absolutely, officer," he said smoothly. "I walked into this dealership to look around. I haven't asked for a test drive. I haven't disrupted any business. I've simply been observing. Apparently, that was enough to warrant a call to you." The officers exchanged a glance, picking up on the tension between Malcolm and Linda. Linda crossed her arms, her frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "He was asked to leave because he was making my staff uncomfortable," she insisted. "We have every right to remove someone if they're not here to do business." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Uncomfortable, how?" Linda hesitated, then gestured vaguely. "He's been walking around acting suspicious. Wouldn't answer direct questions. Malcolm held up a hand, stopping her. "I don't want any confusion here," he said, his voice still calm, controlled. "I have something that should clear this up." Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket, making sure his movements were clear and precise. The officers tensed slightly, their hands hovering near their belts. From his pocket, Malcolm pulled out a slim leather wallet and unfolded a crisp document. "I believe this will explain everything," he said, handing it to the older officer. The officer took the paper, his brow furrowing as he read. Then his expression shifted, from confusion to surprise. He handed the document to his partner, who skimmed it quickly, then looked up at Malcolm, eyes widening. "Wait a second," the younger officer muttered. Linda frowned, her confidence flickering for the first time. "What is that?" she demanded. The older officer cleared his throat and looked straight at her. "Ma'am, this document confirms that Mr. Malcolm Hayes is the new owner of Brookfield Auto Center." A stunned silence fell over the room. Linda's face drained of color. "Wait. What?" she whispered. She looked from the officers to Malcolm, her expression a mix of shock and pure panic. Malcolm held her gaze steadily, the power dynamic flipping in an instant. The officers exchanged an awkward glance. The older one cleared his throat. "Sir, do you need any further assistance from us?" Malcolm shook his head, his tone polite but firm. "No, officers, I appreciate your professionalism. Thank you for your time." The officers nodded and turned to leave. One of them shot Linda a pointed look before stepping out. As the doors closed behind them, the silence in the showroom was deafening. Employees looked at one another, their expressions ranging from shock to unease. Linda took a half step back, her body rigid. I didn't know. No one told me we had a new owner." Malcolm took a slow step forward, his voice now carrying a quiet authority that demanded attention. "And that justifies how you treated me?" he asked, his voice measured but sharp. "How quickly you assumed I didn't belong." Linda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, and at that moment everyone in the room knew. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a reckoning. The silence in Brookfield Auto Center was deafening. Employees who had been pretending not to watch were now fully invested, their gazes flicking between Malcolm Hayes and Linda Parker. Linda's face was drained of color, her usual sharp confidence replaced with pure disbelief. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice shaky. "No one told me we had a new owner." Malcolm tilted his head slightly, his posture still composed, his expression unreadable. "And that justifies how you treated me?" His tone wasn't raised, but the weight behind it was impossible to ignore. Linda's lips parted as if to respond, but Malcolm didn't give her the chance. "How quickly did you assume I didn't belong here?" he continued, his voice steady but edged with something sharper. "How many customers have you treated like this, Linda? How many people have walked in here and been dismissed because of what you thought?" A few employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Linda looked away, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. Malcolm let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. Then, finally, he exhaled. "I came here today to see how this dealership operates, and what I've seen so far." He let out a short, humorless chuckle. "It's unacceptable, not just how you treated me, but the atmosphere you've created for your staff and customers." Linda's breathing grew unsteady. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean?" Malcolm's voice was calm, yet razor-sharp. "You thought you knew who I was the second I walked in. You didn't bother to ask questions, didn't take a second to consider that maybe, just maybe, you were making a mistake." Linda visibly recoiled, but Malcolm wasn't finished. He turned to the employees, his gaze sweeping over them. "Let me make one thing clear," he said, his voice carrying through the showroom. "I'm not just the new owner. I'm someone who believes in treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or how they look." The room remained still, employees now hanging on to his every word. Then his gaze returned to Linda. "And as of this moment, you are no longer the manager of this dealership." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Linda staggered back, her face crumpling. "Please," she whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. "I've given everything to this dealership. I made a mistake, but—" Malcolm shook his head slowly. "This isn't about erasing what you've done. It's about accountability. Actions have consequences, and right now those consequences are looking you in the face." The weight of his words settled like a final verdict. Linda's shoulders slumped, her usual commanding presence reduced to nothing. For the first time that day, she had no control over what happened next. Linda stood frozen, her breath shallow as the reality of Malcolm's words crashed down on her. Her reign at Brookfield Auto Center had just ended. Not with a grand exit, not on her terms, but with humiliation in front of the entire staff. She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. She knew there was no saving this moment. Malcolm let the silence stretch, then finally exhaled. "You can gather your things and leave now, or HR will send your paperwork later." Linda lowered her gaze, nodded stiffly, then turned on her heel and walked toward her office. The clicking of her heels against the tile floor was the only sound in the room. The employees stood still, watching everything unfold, their faces a mix of shock and something else, relief. Malcolm turned to them, his posture still composed, but his expression had softened. "I know what just happened was uncomfortable to watch," he said, his voice carrying through the silent showroom, "and I know some of you are wondering what this means for your future here." A few employees shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uncertain glances. Malcolm let the tension settle, then continued. "Let me be clear, this isn't about tearing anyone down, this is about building something better. A dealership where every customer, every employee is treated with respect. No assumptions, no biases, no excuses." A murmur rippled through the group. Some employees nodded slightly, their shoulders loosening just a bit. The receptionist, a young man with glasses, raised his hand hesitantly. "Sir, if I may, I think some of us have seen things like this before, but we didn't feel like we could say anything. What should we do if we notice something like this happening again?" Malcolm nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the weight of the question. "You speak up," he said firmly. "Whether it's to me or to whoever steps in as the new manager, your voice matters. This isn't just my dealership, it's ours, and it's up to all of us to make it better." A ripple of relief passed through the room. Employees began nodding slightly, their posture relaxing. Malcolm let a small smile tug at the corners of his mouth, sensing the shift. "Now," he said, clapping his hands lightly, "let's get back to work. We've got customers to take care of, and starting today we're going to do that the right way." For the first time all day, the energy in the room felt different, as though a weight had been lifted. Change hadn't just begun, it was already happening. In 2025, workplace culture and inclusive leadership matter more than ever. Malcolm Hayes' story isn't just about one bad manager, it's about the importance of challenging bias and setting a new standard. His actions remind us that leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. In today's world, businesses thrive when respect and fairness are at the core of their values. Whether you're an employer, employee, or customer, this story teaches us that silence enables discrimination, but speaking up creates change. The question is, will you demand better when it matters most? Because real progress starts with action. Malcolm Hayes took a stand for respect and fairness, but his journey as the new owner of Brookfield Auto Center is just beginning. What should his next move be? Should he implement new policies to ensure inclusivity? Mentor employees to recognize and challenge bias? Maybe even expand his business with a fresh vision? Now we want to hear from you. Comment below with your thoughts. How can Malcolm continue making an impact? And if you believe in holding businesses accountable, share this story. Change happens when we take action. What would you do in his place?